interesting that here we are in our first monthly meeting that we're doing virtually, and it's Earth Day, so that seems very appropriate. Warm welcome to everyone tonight. We had over 480 participants sign up for tonight's session. Michael's got quite the global reputation, and so we're absolutely thrilled that he's agreed to speak with us tonight. My name's Jane Graydon. I'm the past president of ICF Toronto, and I'm really honored to be able to support Michael, and I'll be monitoring the Zoom chat over the next hour and getting your questions pulled together and presented to Michael as we go through. Back in March, the ICF board, when faced with COVID, got together and figured we really need to pull together programming that's going to meet the needs of our members. And so we thought, okay, well, we'll do remote sessions, Zoom sessions, and we really wanted to get a solid program together. So as a coach, you know, one of the questions we think about is, what do you want? What do you really, really, really want? And when I reflected on that question, I thought, I want Michael to be speaking with us tonight. With his energy, with his inspiration, with his extensive coaching background, there is really no one else who I thought would be a great lead presenter for us to kick off our robust series of programming for all of our members. So knowing Michael's long-standing support of our chapter, he first presented to our chapter back in 2002 on branding, and now we know all about the Box of Crayons. Branding is a training development company that he's developed so successfully with his brand. And that's just been fabulous. He was a contributor as a member of our board from 2003 to 2006 and has been a continued supporter for us. So very generously agreed to share his wisdom with us this evening. The two best coaching tools. So really excited to hear more about that. Michael's really been at the forefront of making coaching an everyday leadership behavior. And we all know how important it is as leaders to demonstrate this. And that's really been the focus of Michael's work. I know I have recommended to many of my clients his book, The Coaching Habit. It's the best-selling coach book of the century. And really fabulous book. The Advice Trap's his newest book. If you haven't had a chance to look at his TED Talk, really encourage you to go on and review that TEDx that he's got on the Advice Trap. In 2019, he was named the #1 thought leader in coaching and is the founder of the Box of Crayons, the learning development company that's really helps organizations transform from advice-driven to being curious and really being curiosity-led as organizations. You'll know from Michael's accent, 30 years ago, he left Australia. He comes from Australia. He went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and met his lovely wife there. I saw in your blog the other day, Michael, you just celebrated 10,000 days since you first met her, and now lives in Toronto with his lovely wife. Balancing out all of this success that Michael's had, he's gotten himself into a little bit of trouble over the years as well, starting back in high school with the balloon incident. And I understand in law school you were sued by one of your lecturers for defamation. And even though we really like some of Michael's more recent writings, his first writing was a Harlequin romance short story. So certainly we're glad that you've moved from that, Michael, and just like to welcome you here and thank you so much for presenting to us.
Fantastic. I'm excited to be here. Congratulations to all the Prism Award winners. I was actually on the board when we introduced the idea of the Prism Award, which had then spread to the rest of the coaching world. So it's lovely to be here kind of full circle around that. And actually, Jane, I was just remembering, you know, back in 2002, I ran a session on branding for coaches, and that was responsible for me coming up with the name Box of Crayons as my company name, because my company was called something else at the time. And I came up with, I know, Michael's 3 irresistible and unarguable with laws of branding, and my own company name failed all 3 of my rules. So I was like, oh my God, I've got 6 weeks until I have to either abandon my 3 rules or come up with a better name, and Box of Crayons was the name. And it's served me very well over the last 20 years or so. So thanks for being here. It's going to be a fast session. It's going to be pretty interactive as well. We've got 300 people, which is amazing. So thank you everybody for dialing in across North America and maybe further than that as well. I'm going to get you chatting away. Chatbox is our friend here. So I've got a question for you right away, because we are going to use the wisdom of the crowd. Here's the question to start us off. What is your favorite coaching question, your best coaching question? And I want you to think about the combination of has the most power and is perhaps the most unexpected, because I want a bit of variation. So I want to see in the chat box, what's your best coaching question? Because at a bare minimum, somebody's written in what else? Thank you very much. Because at a bare minimum, you should be copying the chat box and going, I'm just stealing a whole bunch of great questions from a whole bunch of really great coaches. I know when I started my coach training, I was basically just a obsessive question hoarder. Everywhere I'd go, I'd be looking for good questions. When I was being trained and I'd watch the senior coaches ask a good question, I'd write that down. When they asked the question that didn't work, I'd cross that out. So what I want you to be doing is thinking about your own best question and then taking a look at some of these wonderful questions that are rolling through here. Some really good questions right away. So that's off to a great start. I love that. I've got another question for you to check in on, because we're doing a webinar. And quite frankly, all of our brains are melting slightly because of the amount of time we are spending on Zoom. So you're here and I'm thrilled about it, but there's part of you is going, I never need to look at another camera as long as I live. I never need to see myself on screen as long as I live. So I want to check in on how you're choosing to show up for the next hour or so. Very simple question. You give yourself a score between 1 and 7. 1 is low, 7 is high. And the question is this: how focused do you plan to be with me over the next hour or so? How focused? 1 is like, look, I intend to be entirely unfocused. I've got my phone out. I've got my other phone out. I've got a band playing in the corner. I've got a hoard of Lindt chocolate in this corner, which I'm really kind of interested in and focused on. I've got sports replays from Maple Leaf Sports playing as well. So I've got that going on. The kids have set fire to something over there. It's chaos. And I'm just using Michael's weird accent as background for me while I do a whole bunch of other stuff. That's a 1. 7, on the other hand, is like, look, I'm bringing full attention to this. I've turned things off. I've put things away. I've locked kids away. I've locked animals away. I've put out fires, whatever it is for you. And honestly, I don't mind what number you give yourself. That's entirely up to you. You're adults, you're coaches, you get to choose how you show up, of course. But I would like you to adjust your environment just in one way. Make one adjustment that gives you a better chance of hitting the goal that you want. For some of you, it's putting your phone away. For some of you, it's pouring an enormous glass of wine. Doesn't matter. I don't care. Just go with it. That works for you. So what's our work as coaches? Well, I mean, you can write long books about this, about what we're doing, but I think of it as a simple but difficult piece of work. And here's how I wrote it down. I think our goal is to make us and our clients better. You can't do one without the other. You know, otherwise you're not working as a coach. Just as we heard Karen's commitment to her self-improvement, as she's a really senior coach. You know, when I came to Toronto 20 years ago, her name was spoken in awe. People would whisper it. And finally, I got to have lunch with her. And I'm like, oh, man, this is Karen Wright, the Karen Wright, capital T, capital K, capital W. And I'm like, this is a woman who's really smart, really great at coaching, and she is ongoingly committed to self-learning. So it's about making our clients better and making ourselves better. And what I realize is that in a simple way, part of what that means is saying yes to the stuff that moves you towards the best version of yourself, and saying no to the stuff that moves you away from the less good version of yourself. And it is as simple, as difficult as that. You know, in this time of weird COVID crisis piece, and people are like, okay, here's my advice on what to do and what to behave. I realize that I don't really have very specific advice because it's so personal to who you are and where you're at in your life and how the virus is affecting you or not affecting you. But I realize that I'm saying to a lot of people, look, my best advice to you is trying to find the path between the light and the dark. between the stuff that's really hard, the stuff that can pull you into a cycle of anxiety and worry and concern, and you can kind of radiate that and infect others. You don't really want that. But nor do you want to be too much in the kind of shiny, happy, clappy, oh, this is amazing, we're reinventing capitalism and reinventing my business model. And that's a little bit tone deaf. You don't want that either. So you want to find the light between the path between the light and the dark. And I think in some ways, one of the most powerful questions you can be asking yourself and your clients is this thing moving you closer to where you want to be and where you want to go, or is it moving you further away from it? And those are the choices you want to keep making. So the two tools that I want to share with you are just these two foundational tools that I use and continue to use to try and make myself move towards the good and to have myself move away from the less good version of myself, which I know all too well. And these tools are like minutes to learn, a lifetime to master. So it's not going to take me too long to teach them to you, but I want you to actually do some work on actually working with them tonight with me. I want you to do your first draft of both of these tools with me. So you'll be able to make something that's useful for you. And perhaps also you'll be able to go and take this and use this with your clients as well, because it may be this is a tool that you want to share with your clients to help them ask the same questions. How do I move towards the best version of myself? How do I move away from the less good version of myself? So the very first tool I want to share with you is something that I came up with way back before I was a coach. This is 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, I worked in the world of innovation. I helped products and companies develop new I helped companies develop new products and services. And what that meant is you have to understand what they were trying to achieve and who they were trying to sell to and what their brand stood for, so you could find the right things to offer to the right clients. And I did a whole bunch of really boring stuff, like the latest line of soups for a big soup company. I did play one small role in helping to invent stuffed crust pizza for Pizza Hut, which actually was a moment where I said to myself, if this is the best moment of my working life, inventing new pizza for Pizza Hut, it is a terrible, terrible working life. I do not want that on my gravestone. And it was actually what kicked me out of the world of that world and got me into change management and then into coaching after that. But one of the challenges when you're working in the world of branding is trying to articulate what a brand stands for. I mean, let's take two vodkas. You've got Absolute vodka from Sweden and you've got Smirnoff vodka from Russia, I guess, or I don't know, maybe America, who knows? Sounds Russian. Russia and Swedish. And let's face it, vodka is basically, it's just plain unflavored alcohol. It's all the same, pretty much. And you're like, okay, so describe the difference between these two brands for me. And it's like, it's really hard to find the language to do that. And what they did in the branding world is they came up with this tool called This, Not That. And they would use the power of metaphor to try and describe what a brand stood for. So rather than using a word, you're using a picture or a metaphor to try and describe it. And you weren't just using one word, you were using two, a pairing of words that made this really powerful. So you might say for a vodka, you might say it's like a Porsche, not a VW. It's bright blue and bright red. It's not pastel colors. It's a nightclub. It's not a field of grain. It is urban. It's not rural. And you kind of get that pattern going. And the more specific you can be about it, the more kind of interesting you get and more nuance on understanding the complexity of a brand. So I was like, well, that's interesting and that's fun. But, you know, at a certain point, you're like, I don't really care about how Absolute vodka is positioned in the market. I do care about how I'm positioned in the market and how I see myself and what the best version of myself is. So I did a twist on this. So I have this tool called This, Not That. This, Not That. You can see I'm going with really sophisticated slides today. And I'm actually going to show you my This, Not That. I carry this around with me. I have a little bag of facilitation tools. So when I go out on the road, and I'm in the good old days where you could actually do that, I have some Sharpies, I have some index cards, I have some painter's tape, I have a little bell that I use as a chime to get people's attention, and I have my This, Not That card. And what this is a list of 8 pairs of words that I've crafted over the years to understand what I'm like at my very best. So I'm going to hold this up. You can kind of take a screen grab of that perhaps, or a photograph of that, or maybe it's out of focus and you can't read it anyway. Maybe it's all mysterious. So, okay, I've heard it up. Let me actually read it out for you for people going, Michael, what are you doing? So, joyful, not fearful. Step forward, not step back. Be playful, not serious. Be loose, not tight. Be curious, not a know-all. Be comfortable, not anxious. Provocative, not sycophantic. And a manifesto of insignificance, which is just, it means something to me rather than it matters. And those are guiding words, guiding phrases for me that invite me towards my best. And here's how it works for me. Where I find it is most useful is when I am slightly off my game. You know, I go somewhere and for some reason I'm like, oh, I'm just not feeling at my best right now. I'm feeling a little bit awkward, a little bit off. You know, I remember once going down to Detroit to go and talk to all these senior people in the motor industry at the time. And I walk into this room and seriously, it was 100% alpha males. They were all 6'3". They were all clean shaven. They all wore gray suits and white shirts and red ties. They all crushed my hand with their uber masculine handshake. And I was like, these are my least favorite group. I'm just not that good with people like this. They kind of trigger me a little bit. So I could feel myself shrinking. I could feel myself getting fearful, serious, tight, a bit anxious. And what I noticed is when I noticed some of those symptoms coming up, I was like, oh, this is me when I'm 10% off my game. And what that does is it allows me to go back and go, well, what am I like when I'm actually playing full out at the best version of myself? And that's where I found those pairings. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm getting tight. What I need to do is remember to be loose. So you can see how I'm loose at the moment when I'm presenting and talking to you. I've practiced this for years so that I know how to be loose and I know how to move myself towards looseness, because fundamentally my body leads my brain. So my looseness tells me that actually I'm feeling pretty good about it. And so it becomes a virtuous circle. So this pairing of words, and I bet because you're smart people, you're already going away going, okay, let me start crafting my pairs of words. I like them. Here's my tip. And I'm going to actually ask you to come up with 3 draft pairs of words, 3 draft pairs of words. And there are 2 sources you can think about where you might draw this from. The first is, and this is probably fairly obvious because as coaches, you've done this as you've helped people figure out values and the like. You go to peak moments. You go to peak moments where you're like, okay, what were you like at that best moment where you felt on top of the world and you felt in the flow state and you're like, time is speeding up and slowing down and you're like that. What does that look like? What do those moments feel like to you? And that might be a clue. The problem with starting there is sometimes it becomes a bit generic and a bit abstract and a bit kind of highfalutin. And there's something useful when you do these pairs of words to make them more visceral, more in the body, more kind of understandable at a physical level. So actually, I find a place that is really useful for me to start is reflecting on times when I felt slightly off. So I would go to that place in Detroit, that time in Detroit, and go, what was that like for me? Well, I was quiet. I was anxious. I was, worried about how people were judging me or thinking about me because I'm like, I'm honing in on a man bun at this stage, such as the lack of hairdressing, which is, it's got to that. But, all of that. And I'm like, that was really helpful because I'm like, okay, that's what I'm like when I'm slightly off my game, not failing utterly, not kind of in the depths of despair, but 10% off. If I imagine myself as the best version out of that, what would that look like? What would that be? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work with Jane. Jane's been kind enough to say she'll talk to me as we go through this. I'm going to have a conversation with her about what was valuable for her about this and also what her 3 pairs have been, words, her draft words. I'm putting her on the spot totally. What I'd like to see from you is some of your pairs of words and start sharing them in the chat box. Because I know when I showed you my pair here, you're like, oh, I want to steal some of those. And you know what? I want you to steal them. I want you to steal the ones that work for you because they're a good draft. Now, I'm going to say them really quickly to you, and then I'm going to go and talk to Jane. Joyful, not fearful. Step forward, not step back. playful, not serious, loose, not tight, curious, not a know-it-all, comfortable, not anxious, provocative, not sycophantic. And the last one doesn't really make sense because it's personal. Jane, first of
Yes,
all,
Michael.
what, if anything, was useful or valuable for you around me just teaching me that fast tool?
Oh, well, it absolutely brought me back to those situations when I was off my game. And I started to try to understand that from a different perspective and to try to think about how was I, right? And what am I doing to try to move forward? And the idea of having the card is really a simple, easy way to get in a new space.
I mean, it is really annoying, but we learn so much more from failure and struggle than we do from winning and success. And even though we all want to be champions, we all want to win our own Prism Awards, you know, I've had some clients where I'm like, I love this client. And just as Dominic said about Marshall Goldsmith, part of the success of being a good coach is choosing your clients well. Mm-hmm. But boy, have I learned something from the clients who hated me. I've got smarter about me and my business and about them and about how to run a business and how to do coaching. You learn from your mistakes. You know, somebody once said, wisdom enters through the wound. So going to that, not that piece is kind of where wisdom enters around. This is me when I'm off my game. Get clear on that. Don't run away from it. Look at it and then go, how do I get to the other side of that? What does the better version of that look like? So Jane, if you were to give me one of your pairs of words, one that feels really strong for you at the moment, what would you give me?
Curious versus knowing.
Very nice. And so let me ask you this. How does knowing show up? What does that look like when you're in the knowing mode?
When I'm in the knowing mode, it's making assumptions, maybe having some sort of judgments, and making us, just assuming things.
Yeah, very nice. And what I would say to all of you, just as Jane is describing that, is the more specific you can get as to what that feels like, the better this tool becomes for you, because it doesn't just lay in a kind of abstract land. It's like, oh, I feel it. Like I know when I'm in knowing mode, because knowing is one of mine, curious, not a know-all. Here's what I look. I stop listening. My mouth gets a little tight. And I actually have a bit of a grumpy resting face. So now I look serious and kind of slightly angry and bitter. Okay. I start nodding more than I normally do because I'm now actually going, can we just hurry this up, please? Because I just want you to stop talking because, you know, I'm supposed to be a good coach. So I can't actually interrupt you. But seriously, could you just speed this up, please? And I get a little kind of crisp about things. I lose some of my softness. I lose some of my gentleness. I lose some of my presence with that other person. The other thing that happens is I move to the edge of my seat and I will often start jiggling my right foot. I literally have a weird crease in one of my shoes from where I've jiggled my foot so often that it's just now wrecked that pair of shoes. So I've got these very physical, very visceral tells that I've just tried to become aware of because I go, oh, look at this. I'm jiggling my leg. Oh, you know what this means? It means that I'm in advice giving mode. And when I'm in advice giving mode, I'm on this side, I'm not on that side. So how do I get curious? Well, I get curious as I drop my shoulders, I smile, I sit back, I let my legs kind of untense a little bit, and I care less. I'm just less caught up in the kind of ego of it all. And that I can feel that physical shift. So I'm seeing lots of really great words coming through here, and that's fantastic. What you might choose to do is continue to look at them and go, are those the very best words? Or can I tweak those words just slightly to make them really ring true for me? I mean, for me, the phrase provocative, not sycophantic, I just love those two words. They really resonate for me, both of them. I want to stir things up a little bit. And I know exactly what being a sycophant is. Somebody who sucks up, somebody who's kind of like ingratiates, a brown noser. But ingratiate or brown nose or suck up, those don't work for me so well. But sycophantic, oh, I love that word. So keep working your words. Start with 3. You don't want to have more than about 9. After 9, it becomes a bit pointless. It becomes just a huge list and it's not that useful. This is actually probably a little bit too long. I probably now go, maybe keep it to 7 or less. Let me ask all of you as you're typing in the chat box, what was useful or valuable about that first tool for you so far? What are you taking away from this? What was your aha moment? What do you know now that you didn't know before? I'll just take a sip of tea. Nice structure, evocative, simple structure, patient. So lots of nice things rolling through here. Simplicity of it all. I'm a big champion for simplicity on the other side of complexity. Hey, here's one of the other things that I hope you are noticing and learning is how is Michael facilitating this session in a world where we are all done with Zoom meetings. You're going to notice a whole bunch of things, everything from the fact that I'm deliberately standing off center, that I have an interesting background, that I have good lighting from 2 sides, that I have a good microphone, that I'm pretty active, that I'm really working the camera. There's all sorts of little things I'm doing as a facilitator that you might want to be noticing and going, I should see what I can do about that so that my presence and the experience that I deliver people when I'm online is a more dynamic, more engaging, more irresistible presence. So kind of a bonus meta level of learning if you're interested. If you're not, forget it. So lots of, somebody's writing a good shirt. Of course, above all else, get a good shirt. That's the key rule of being a successful coach. All right.
I think this is the first time, Michael, I think this is the first time I haven't seen you with a multicolored shirt.
Well, you know, I've got to mix things up a little bit. It's like, it is kind of hippie flowery. So, you know. Tool number 2, because for me, the this, not that is you moving towards the good. So let's talk about a tool to help you move away from the bad, the stuff that drags you back into an old way of behaving. And, you know, I had a boss when I lived in Boston before I moved to Toronto. So this is 20 years ago. I lived in Boston, 99 to 2001. And I hated this boss, and you know, it was mutual. He didn't like me at all. We were having a really tough time of it. You know, I'd gone with him and a small group of people to set up an office in Boston. We had been living in London, England before then. And quite frankly, it all just went to hell. You know, our big client left. We were struggling. We didn't know anybody. And he was not the man for the moment. And after kind of 2.5 or 3 miserable years where I achieved very little, I left and I came up to Toronto. And I remember in probably when I was on the ICF board, maybe 2004, just thinking of this man and just getting totally wound up by it. I'm sure you've experienced this. You know, you think of that person and you're like, oh, and in your head, or at least in my head, I'm having these amazing conversations where I absolutely crush him with the force of my intellect and wit and I tell him the things that I've been meaning to tell him for 5 years. And it suddenly occurred to me, I'm like, you know what? I bet he is giving me exactly 0.000 seconds of his time thinking about me. I bet you I never even cross his mind. And yet here I am having a whole bunch of energy and focus and who knows what else consumed by being triggered and by thinking of this guy. And about this time, I read a book by a woman called Deborah Ford. Now, she was pretty big in the early 200s. She wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And I know we've got a bunch of people from the West Coast here. She was based in California somewhere, I think. And she died tragically young, kind of in her 50s of cancer. And honestly, when I first picked up this book, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, I was like, this is why I hate California. It's just full of hippy, dippy, you know, touchy-feely, woo-woo language. I'm like, this stuff drives me nuts. But, you know, reading into it, she was a huge fan of Jung, Carl Jung. And part of the teachings of Jung is this understanding of the shadow side. And the shadow side, I mean, this is pop psychology, so don't, you know, I don't even play a psychologist on web cameras. So this is just my best understanding of it. I probably get it slightly wrong. But Jung would say growing up, we get a message of we need to be good. And we take that stuff of us that is bad and we shove it into a big sack. This is the metaphor. And this becomes our shadow, our dark side, our unintegrated parts of ourselves. Jung said, I'd rather be whole than be good. And his key insight behind that is most of us are trying to be good and we sacrifice being whole as a result of that. And his insight would be that when we get triggered by somebody, when somebody winds us up, and honestly, if you don't have anybody who winds you up, you don't need to be on this call because you are an enlightened human being and you've already ascended to a state of kind of interface with the heavens in a way that none of us can ever get there. But for the rest of us normal people, if you get wound up by somebody, the useful framing for me is it tells you, it is a mirror. It tells you this is part of you that is not integrated yet, is not who you are. Or you haven't fully understood that this is part of you and you need to integrate it for it to not be wound up. So I'll explain what I mean by that. This is another simple tool, another simple kind of write it out, draw a line down the middle of a bit of paper. It takes you 5 minutes to do this and then a lifetime to fine tune it. They are, I am. They are, I am. And here is the exercise. I want you to do this with me right now. I want you to do this work. This is deeper work. You may need to grab that glass of wine at this stage, but I want you to think of a person who winds you up. Look after yourself. So go somewhere safe. Don't go with somebody who really pushes your buttons in a dangerous way, but find somebody who just, you're like, oh, this person. And I'm sure you can bring somebody to mind. And what I want you to do is I want you to write down the 7 things, and there's more, but write down the 7 things that drive you nuts about that person. I'll show you what I wrote down on this guy. He is small-minded, controlling, out of his depth, money-driven, status-obsessed, Napoleonic, because he was actually about 5'2", a suck-up and a kick-down. I mean, honestly, that took me about 30 seconds to write. If you'd given me 5 minutes, it would have been a really long list. But you know what? I don't have the time to read it all out. But what's that stuff about that person that just makes you catch your breath, makes you tighten your shoulders, that triggers your little amygdala, so you're in fight or flight mode, and you're like, I've stopped listening to Michael because I'm kind of consumed by thinking about this person. Thanks a lot, Michael. And then here is the exercise, and it is hard. The first time I did this, I kind of had to do it almost under a blanket because it's provocative, it's challenging. In that next column, you write down, I am, and you write down all those words again. I am small-minded. I am controlling. I am out of my depth. I am money-driven. I am status-obsessed. I am Napoleonic. I am suck up and kick down. I'll just give you a space to do that. And what I'm guessing is as you write that down, you feel that flare of resistance and maybe a flush in your face. I get that. I get that kind of body experience going, oh, wow, this is challenging. This is provocative. I don't want to believe this. I don't want this to be true. And you don't want it to be true because you've spent, if you buy into this whole idea of Jung and shadow stuff, you spent your early life putting that behind you going, I can't admit to this because if I admit to this, I'm not a good person anymore and I want to be a good person. And part of the magic of this is by owning it, it loses its grip on you. One of the really challenging phrases there for me was, this guy, money obsessed. I mean, he really was like, money is one of the ways I value myself and I believe others are valued. And I don't have that background. And I come from a family where, we weren't poor, but nor were we wealthy. And there was a way which is like, don't be driven by money. So for me to write down, I am money driven, was a very hard thing to do because it challenged a whole kind of mask that I built for myself, not just for me to believe, for my wife to believe, for my family to believe, for my clients to believe. It really was difficult and was provocative. But here's what became amazing for me. When I owned that, I turned out to be less driven by it rather than more driven by it. And when I owned that, I could say, you know what, there is part of me that is money obsessed. That is true. I do care how much money I have in my bank account. I do care that I get paid well. I do care how my rate's different or same or better or worse than other people. And it actually allowed me to not have money driven driving my actual behavior. In a weird way, owning it allowed me to integrate it, but then actually manage it actively rather than be triggered by it. Hey, Jane, let me call you on. And let me start off by asking you, if I can, what was most useful and most valuable for you in this exercise so far? It's quite provocative, I realize.
Yeah, it's very, very provocative for sure. I'm reading some of the comments here. I'm seeing, holy cow, so deep and excruciating. And I think there is that pain in it, right? So yeah, it's hard to acknowledge, right?
Yeah.
Some of these things. And it's sort of like, but when you really think about it, then you can start to see how, yeah, I haven't wanted to believe this. And it's about time I own it.
And of course, you're at choice here. You can look at this and go, this is a stupid exercise and I don't want to do it. Or this might not be a stupid exercise, but it's not working for me. Or this is probably a good exercise, but I don't want to do it. That's fine. You know, there is a time and a place and a season to do this work. And for some of you, it might be now. And for some of you, it might be later. And for some of you, you're like, if I never do this, I'll be totally fine. Thank you very much. Where's that glass of wine? And there may be a way where you go, this is interesting, and maybe this will serve my clients in some ways. If you're working with somebody and you notice that they're reactive, that they're triggered, that they're irritated, that they spend lots of time complaining about other people, well, here's a powerful way to make that other person a tool for self-development, not just somebody to nag on about. Jane, you don't have to share this, but I'm going to ask you if you'd like to. Is there a they are, I am pairing that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. One was they are self-centered.
Right.
I am self-centered. Ouch.
Yeah, exactly. And you can, as you see Jane's face, you can kind of feel that I'm making this up a little bit, Jane, but you've got that smile on and it's a little bit forced. There's part of you going, oh God, what the hell did I agree to be a co-host with Michael on this one? This is a terrible decision. And if you want to be witnessed, this is speaking to everybody who's on the call here, 300, close over 300 people, amazing. If you'd like to be witnessed, because sometimes there's something powerful about writing it down and sharing it amongst a group of friendly strangers, just like Karen said, you know, coaches are just a good group of people. You know, feel free to share an insight for you. They are, I am. Type it out, share it, because, you know, in some ways it's a bit like asking for money. You know, I know this is, at least this is a thing in my day, particularly when I was coaching, which is like, how do you ask for X $100 per session or whatever it might be? And really the answer is you just keep saying it until it loses its power over you. A session with me is $10,000. And that's not true, but never mind. Let's pretend it is. A session with me is $10,000. A session with me is $10,000. A session with me is $10,000. By the time you said this 400 times, you're like, whatever. Session with me is $10,000. It's not triggering for me anymore. And there's something about owning this and saying it and playing with it and playing with the power of it and noticing how it pushes you and how it pushes your buttons and how it triggers you. And you get to kind of see if you're still stuck in that or whether it's losing its power on you. You know, like I said right at the start, both of these tools, kind of minutes to learn, but a lifetime to master. So I hope you look at this as the beginning of something rather than the kind of, and that's done and we're wrapped up here. This has some kind of deeper roots, this. Let me ask all of you who are typing away here, what, if anything, was powerful or useful or valuable for you from that second tool that I gave you, the they are, I am tool? What was useful or valuable for you there? And you're welcome to say nothing at all if it didn't strike a chord for you. So lots of lovely things coming through there. And like I say, there's something very valuable in the chat here. You know, this is a big belief I have is collectively we are so much wiser than a few of us. So even while I'm on the front of the room, so to speak, really the learning and the support and the opportunity for growth comes from your colleagues who are online with you here and the ICF community that we have around us. What have I got? I've got two final slides to show you. First of all, just to say this, look, if you're interested in some of this self-development stuff, I do have a website, MBS Works, and I have a free 1-year video-based course called The Year of Living Brilliantly, 52 different teachers, 52 different videos, 1 per week. They're fantastic. Really, I just tapped a whole bunch of some of my favorite people and went, come and teach something cool to this community. So Year of Living Brilliantly at mbs.works if you'd like to go there. And as my kind of last formal act, and then we'll keep it open for questions and stuff for a little bit longer, I'd ask you this. We covered a lot. We covered the 2 tools, the I care, this, not that. And then we did the they are and I am. But we also saw me facilitating, and you also maybe took some other things from this. If you had to summarize it, and you had to ask what was the one thing, what was the most useful thing from this whole session with me tonight? What's the one key thing that you're taking away? So lovely. So this, not that, writing it down, the hope, hearing you live in person, thank you. The self-reflecting piece, the I am, they are, the first tool, the passion. So lots of great things coming through here. I'm delighted to see all of this because it was a helpful, useful session for you. So that's fantastic. Jane, while people are completing here, writing down what was most useful and most valuable for them, I want to hand it back to you and go, all right, where do we go from here? What do you want to do?
Yeah,
well, a bit of time.
Well, there was a comment there. Someone wanted to hear again just about the Year of Living Brilliantly. Can you just review that? Yeah.
Let me hold up my sophisticated piece of marketing here. So there's my website, mbs.works. And if you go there, you'll see that there's a kind of a doorway to the Year of Living Brilliantly. It is a year-long video-based course, 52 different teachers, 52 different videos, 1 per week. You get a video of somebody with a 2 to 6 minute video. They teach you something cool. I will then send out an email shortly after that going, here's what I learned. What did you learn? There's a really thriving community based around it. It's absolutely free. It's just an invitation to come and play and learn from some great people. My bet is not all 52 of these teachers will resonate for you. I'd be surprised if they did. They don't resonate for me. Some of them I'm like, yeah, you're a cool person. I don't understand what that lesson's about. But I reckon if you walk away with 20 new teachers, then you are nourished in a way that is powerful for you as a coach. You get to bring that to your client. You perhaps get to introduce your client to new teachers as well. And part of our jobs as coaches is to educate, to teach, to help our clients get better and smarter and wiser. And the more you know, the better you're able to make connections for people. So yeah, you're living brilliantly at mbs.works. Thanks, Jane.
Great. So the last part of our evening tonight, we wanted to open it up for questions for Michael. You know, he's got a wealth of background, Coach of the Year, so much experience facilitating in the remote environments, presenting as he did tonight. Again, fabulous for us to pick up some of those tips. I recognize I'm doing all the things wrong that you were saying. I'm perfectly center and everything else. But just wanted to open it up for questions. And if people could just type any questions that you have for Michael in the chat, and I will
yeah, feel free to ask me anything. I can't promise you I'll answer everything, but I'm happy for you to kind of ask away.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much an open book.
So there's a question here about what's the most important thing you could offer on your journey? I'm
not totally sure what that question means, but I'll tell you what I think I am best at. I think and this is in some ways easy because I just asked my mailing list this because I'm trying to figure this out a little bit. It's like, who am I? Who will I be when I grow up? Because I founded Box of Crayons almost 20 years ago. I stopped being CEO of that 9 months ago. And now I've actually moved away so that I'm really just kind of in a board position. So I talk to my CEO once a month. So it's very odd. But it means like, okay, who am I when I'm not the Box of Crayons guy? But what people tell me is I'm good at teaching. So taking complicated stuff and making it feel simple and practical. And I'm good at having a voice that feels authentic. So your sense is that this is who I am. And that's mostly true. I mean, I'm a little louder, a little more animated because when you're teaching online, you have to be about 15% more animated than you are in a regular presentation. But this is mostly what I'm like. I mean, Karen's a good friend of mine. She'll tell you that that's mostly true. And then we can watch the comments to see whether she actually confirms or denies that. I don't get too caught up in myself. So there's a way where I go, look, I'm much more interested in being a provocateur and somebody who has some good questions rather than being an authority who's telling you how to do it. Like I want to give you options. I want to give you choices. That's what I'm most interested in. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about myself at the moment, but it's a bit of a journey for me right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a couple of questions around how you actually put the two tools you've taught us tonight into practice with your coaching clients. Yep.
Well, I just do what I did. I'm like, hey, so you have to understand, one of my core tenets of being a coach is be lazy. Like, stop working so hard to try and be tricky and try and be like, oh, look at me. I'm the puppet master manipulating this relationship in a way that will get you to where you think you want to go. I just speak to what's going on. You know, it could be like this. Hey, Bob, I just came across this useful tool and you know what? Thinking about this and that and the other, this might be a useful thing for us to do. It might not work. And if so, we can just blame this dude, Michael, because I'm not quite sure about him anyway, but it could be really powerful. So let me take you through it and then let's see how this works. What do you think? Should we do this or should we not? So give them a choice, offer it up in a way that allows both of you to go, yeah, that was a stupid idea. And you can walk away from it without losing face. Whenever I'm offering advice, I will almost always go, okay, well, I've got some ideas that I'm just firing from the hip. They may be totally wrong, but let me just throw out what I've got and we can just see if anything's useful here. And I'll throw it out. And if I'm having cocktails with Karen will go, yeah, there's nothing here, Michael. This is all ridiculous. And I'm like, exactly. See, I thought as much. So let's just have another cocktail. And my status doesn't go down and her status doesn't go down and we're not kind of invested and we have to make these ideas work, one of us or the other. We're like, you offer it up in a way that allows both of you to retreat from it.
Great. There's a question about, are any of the tools detailed in any of your books or on your website? Or
actually, yeah, the This Not That tool is from the very first, actually it wasn't the first book I wrote. This book is about 10 years old now. I think it came out in 2010. It's called Do More Great Work. It's still in print. And it has 15 different tools in there to help you find and articulate your great work. For me, great work is the work that has more impact and the work that has more meaning. So how do you bring the best of yourself to make more of a difference to the world? And there are 15 exercises, which as a coach or a facilitator, you can take people through that will go, hey, here's how you figure out what your great work is. And the This Not That exercise is part of that.
Great, thank you. There's a question here about reflection and what tools you use to help you reflect.
Well, I have some really good people in my life. So one of the most powerful tools I've used is a mastermind group. So I've had a mastermind group for 15 years. which was remarkable. We've had to reinvent ourselves probably 3 or 4 times because we found ourselves getting stale. And we're like, okay, we need to flip this around and shake it up so it's still useful for us. But they're, you know, when we started 15 years ago, we were all kind of in the same field in terms of a coaching practice and a certain size. We're all now quite different in what we do in terms of our businesses, but we check in on a daily basis on a web forum. Let's say 3 to 5 times a week on a web forum. We talk twice a month for an hour or an hour and a half, and we check in, and then somebody goes, I could do with some coaching and support around this. And we meet once a year for 4 or 5 days to do some deeper work. I have a circle of, you know, good friends and coaches, people who know me. Karen Wright's one of those people who will, you know, she's a truth teller for me. So she's really helpful for me to figure out who I am. And I journal a little bit. I'm not good at the kind of artist way, write for 5 minutes without thinking, but I tend to use the bullet journal approach. And that's just a way for me to keep reviewing what's going on and creating the space. But the key discipline, which I'm not very good at, but I'm really trying to enforce at the moment, is just to try not to overschedule myself and to have lots of input. So, you know, I can show you. This is on my desk, and this is April reading for me. I've read about half of these books this month, but it's a really eclectic mix of stuff around business, about psychology, around science, a bunch of stuff there. And what's useful for me is to have incoming stuff that I then think about and trigger off and kind of get reflecting on. I'm best understanding myself relative to other ideas and other thinkers.
Wow. Yeah, great. There was a question around just how many members in your mastermind?
There's 5 of us.
Okay, great. Yeah. You showed us before the video conference started your background. Someone's asking about your background. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, this comes from a company in the States called Anyvoo, Anyvoo. It's relatively expensive. It's like $300 or $400, so it's not a cheap investment. But what I love about it is it's actually a soft fabric, a stretchy fabric. So it comes with a lightweight frame that you assemble, and then you just kind of zip it up like a sleeping bag, and it goes over it. On this side is the design that I uploaded, so you get to choose whatever you want. You can upload any design you want. On the other side is a green screen. So if you want to flip it around, you can do a green screen. And it's super light, so I can just take it down. And then there's the stand, and then there's the real back of my office there. So, you know, we're all trying to figure out how to present at home and do different things at home. And I pretty early on really didn't want to have a fake office projected behind me. I spent my whole life trying to escape from offices. Why would I pretend to be sitting in one? So I tried to get one that felt on brand for me, which is yellow and bold and a bit provocative and interesting.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think do you share your book list? Do you have a book list? And have you got your most recent book there too that you can show us the cover of? Sure,
let me find that. There's my most recent book, The Advice Trap. It's a deeper dive. I mean, the coaching habit is here's 7 powerful questions. Here's why they work so well. Here's how to make coaching less weird and more simple and more accessible. It's not written so much for coaches. It's written for people who'd like to be more coach-like. This is actually a little bit more for coaches, which is about behavior change and a deeper dive into what does it take to actually shift our behavior. Kind of get into taming your advice monster and easy change versus hard change. It was a harder book to write, and it deals with more trickier concepts, I think.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. There was a question around, during these times of COVID, how can you keep the mental energy positive? How can you sort of be there with your clients and, not sort of help them fall down the spiral? You talked about the dark and the light.
I think the primary thing is just to admit that this is a really hard time, and that if you think you're operating at 100% right now, you just haven't understood what's going on. you everybody is suboptimal right now, because you might have, and I hope you do have, good stretches. But if like me, you have some days where you're like, guys, I was utterly hopeless today, and I can't totally pin it down. But I was talking to my wife today, and for those of us who are in Canada, we've had this terrible shooting in Nova Scotia, and she's from Nova Scotia. She's from Dartmouth, which is where the guy was originally from. And she's quite shaken up by it. And it's like this combination of that plus being under lockdown for 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is now. It is hard. So I think it is about, don't kind of go, look, I'm gritting my teeth and I'm going to be positive the whole time. It's about giving yourself and giving others permission to be messy. And I think it's about saying, so knowing that, what is the essential things for us to focus on? And, this is when you've got to go, if I could only do 40% of what I normally do, what would I do? And how do I make sure that the energy I have is given to that 40%? So you can apply the right energy to the right things. But if you're like, I'm just going to carry on with the same workload as before, and hope my clients do the same, I think that does nobody a service. This is, our brain loves certainty, and it is a time of deep uncertainty. We don't know how long this is going on for. Depending where in the world you are, you don't know what the hell your politicians are doing. You don't know how this is affecting the economy. You don't know what this means for the future of coaching. You don't know what this means in terms of your current and future clients. There's just a lot we don't know. And, there's a thing called the Stockdale Paradox. It comes from the Vietnam War, and Stockdale in a prisoner of war camp. And the Stockdale Paradox is, in essence, the optimists die first, because they're the ones that go, oh, this will be over by July, or we'll open the economy by Easter, or we'll open the economy by July, or we'll open the economy by September. And at a certain point, they're like, we're never going to open the economy, and they drop dead, And what Stockdale would say, and this goes all the way back to kind of man's search for meaning, and Frankl, is grounded, realistic optimism. This too will pass. There will be we will move out of the darkness into the light, but you've got to deal with reality as it is now. And the reality is, you should be a bit of a mess right now, some of the time.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm no authority here. I'm just using a soapbox. So don't, as with everything I've shared tonight, take what's useful, ignore what's not.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Somebody was asking about what's the most challenging conversation, the client conversation you've had.
Well, that's an interesting question, because it depends on what you hold for yourself. I remember a very shocking one where I ran a session for a very senior person in a really big pharmaceutical thing. And honestly, it'd been this dysfunctional team. And I came in and I designed something amazing. I mean, it was just a fantastic 3-day experience, and it involved taking out people to art galleries. And at the end, when we're kind of checking in, everyone's like, we've made more progress in 3 days than we have for 6 years, blah, 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 blah. I was just walking out going, I'm a legend. And it was somebody on the team who'd brought me in, and the big boss called me. It was a weekend, and then she called me on a Monday. And honestly, I was like, this is great. But she's the, EFNRSFVP of HR. So she's going to ask me to coach the CEO of one of the top 3 pharmaceutical companies in the world. So I was kind of puffed up, feeling pretty good about myself. She gets on the phone and she goes, well, that was an absolute disaster, and I will ensure that you will never work for this pharmaceutical company ever again. And hung up the phone. I was like, oh my goodness, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh, and then thinking about it, I was like, okay, so she runs this team. It's been dysfunctional for 6 years. There's just a whole bunch I did not understand about politics and status and control and authority and understanding and getting buy-in before I did stuff. You know, it was quite shocking at the time, but it taught me a lot about the nuances of actually working with stuff. Because, like, you know, I just waded in oblivious and just did my song and dance. And the team loved it, but the key client hated it because it absolutely diminished her status. Now, yeah, so there's that. So that's just another disaster. In some ways, that's easier. But for me, the more challenging client relationships are the ones where things slowly get off course. And it's a tiny bit at first, and it slowly drifts. And you get to that place of dysfunction. You're like, oh, no, do I say something? Do I not say something? And one of the questions that I use as a way now of trying to keep relationships clean and robust is that on a regular basis, I will ask the other person what needs to be said that hasn't been said. And in part, I ask it so that I have permission to say the things that I'm too cowardly to say. But it gives you a chance to often actually celebrate what hasn't been acknowledged and celebrated. But it's also a chance for you to go, you know, this is a thing that's niggling. This is a thing that it's just slightly off, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but allow me to put it out there now because we've got permission to do that. And so that's the way I try and deal with the challenging client relationships at the moment, which is try and hold myself to that standard of what needs to be said that hasn't been said.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was a question around, have you ever used the I'm this, not that constructively with groups or with teams?
I haven't, but you can see how you could easily adapt that to be an interesting tool to work with a team. If I was the facilitator of that, I'd be asking, why am I doing that? What does success look like? And is this the best way for me to get to that success? Because there may be a way of using that to create some team norms in interesting language, but it might be a laborious process to try and get everybody to talk that through. And you might run the danger of this, not that, effectively written by a committee, which means that you'd get sort of pretty bland pairings of words. I have integrity. I'm not corrupt. I'm nice. I'm not nasty. You know, something kind of banal like that. Yes. So the question is always, what am I trying to get? What am I trying to get to? And what's the route there that is interesting, provocative, and efficient?
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Well, Michael, I just wanted to thank you so much for this evening's session. The two tools that you shared with us are so powerful. We're seeing a lot of comments coming up in the Zoom chat just about your sharing your energy. Is just, we're very grateful for you continuing to show such wonderful support for ICF Toronto, for coaches around the world. And I certainly myself am going to be taking away both of these tools. I need to probably put myself under a blanket, like you were saying on the second one, and really come to grips with some of that realization. But really looking forward to helping bring some of this to my clients as well.
Brilliant. Jane, thank you. Thanks to the ICF board for putting this on, for sponsoring the PRISM Award. Huge congrats to all the PRISM winners, because that is such a big honor and such a big achievement, especially to Karen, who I love dearly and is a good friend of mine. And thanks to everybody who's dialed in from around the country, around the continent to be here. It's lovely to have such a big, enthusiastic, engaged audience. So thanks for all of that.
Yes, great. Thank you. And if everyone in the audience enjoyed tonight's session, just encourage you to consider having the active member of ICF Toronto, and going online, you can sign up for the $100 activity fee for the year of services coming up. So encourage everyone to link in with us on icftoronto.com. And thank you very much. Have the good rest of your evening. Cheerio.
Bye, everybody.